News First, Newsline.
Very good evening and welcome to another edition of Newsline, coming to you live and direct from our News First studios here in Colombo. Much has been spoken about the energy security in Sri Lanka. I think our viewers might remember last year, somewhere around this time, we still had long power cuts. A few months before this time last year, we had about 13 to 15 hour power cuts. And people across the country were just left in limbo because what do you do without power? But today, is energy security ensured here in Sri Lanka? Even a few days ago, we had a bit of a scare as to whether or not there will be enough power to supply an uninterrupted supply of power to the south because there was a drought in that area and people needed water for their fields. But at the end of the day, many of the farmlands were destroyed. Now water is provided. However, farmers say that it's a little too late to revive their paddy fields. But an uninterrupted supply of power was maintained in the south as well. Now, to discuss the energy sector issues here in Sri Lanka, we've got a person who has been quite vociferous in that front, and rightly so given his previous position that he held, the former chairman of the PUCSL, Janaka Ratnayake. Mr. Ratnayake, now we're speaking about energy security in Sri Lanka. We're speaking about reforming the CEB. There are steps taken towards reforming the CEB, and when all government ministers are considered, the Minister of Power, Kanchana Wijesekara, is one of the more active, at least, ministers in government. He has been coming out and speaking out, voicing the concerns and plans, at least, for the power sector here in Sri Lanka. The power sector is one of those sectors that we got really, really wrong during the past few decades, which ended up in people having to suffer power outages for about 15 hours. But with these massive reforms being proposed, and also given the fact that these reforms are coming from a government that does not have the mandate of the people, what do you think? Will these reforms at least be a step in the right direction compared to all the mistakes that we have made during the past 2 to 3 decades here in Sri Lanka?
I think, yes, energy security in Sri Lanka is compromised. And you would have seen that the electricity dilemma has even changed the entire government. And we saw, as you rightly mentioned, we had up to around 12 to 13 hours, the longest power cuts.
I believe 15 also was there.
No, the maximum was 13 hours.
13 hours, okay.
13 hours, just before the everything changed. And many people, I think, walked onto roads, and, you know, they started, you know, showing their resentment and maybe the agitation to the government. And it changed not only here, the government, and it changed even in the other countries, developed countries. So energy security is very much important in this era, because our lives in this modern era is depending very much on electricity. And when it is compromised, and the household or maybe the life of everybody will become a problem. And when you talk about the reforms means that if the entity is not doing well, that you take measures to make sure that the particular entity is properly managed. Now, the reforms in Sri Lanka has been, up to now, if you look at maybe the certain reforms that they are trying to engage in CPC and CB, we feel that the reforms and the restructuring means they are trying to break these big entities into small pieces. By making the big entities into small pieces, if you think that you can get into the objectives of what you are planning for, will not come right, because these entities, whether it is owned by the private sector or the public sector, or maybe by both sectors together, PPP, it will not bring the required the results unless you manage these entities properly. So what you need to do is, you need to fix the problems before you break these big entities into pieces, because if you look at this electricity reform, the final draft, which I am in possession of the entire document, it's a very lengthy document. And I can remember that even 2 months back that I wrote I managed to get the preliminary document, and I made sure that people will know about it. Now, what their main intention is to make sure this huge entity, to my knowledge, I think this is the biggest business in Sri Lanka. And why I say is that CB, according to the tariff revisions, they are supposed to make around 700 billion in turnover, revenue per year.
Okay.
And they do around they collect around 50 billion from the consumers every month. Now, 1 year back, before we increased the tariff for the first time in August 2022 by 75%, although CB asked for 250%, PCSL with so much of deliberation and calculation, we offered only 75%. And they said that was not enough. Then in February, they wanted another almost 75%, but the PUCSL with their calculations and the deliberations, we said under my chairmanship that we can give only up to around 30%. And but the government with the political influences, they ignored that. Then without looking at the going by the recommendations of the PUCSL, they illegally increased that by 65%. That means from last August till today, electricity bill has gone up by 300%. And what happened in January revision, although I was not part of the team, the present the members of the PUCSL offered only 30% increase. And that is the right thing to do, because what happened was in February, we proposed the same thing. And now the certain categories are under 30, 60 and 90, the consumers are using less electricity units, are paying less, and their rates have come down to almost the previous level. It's a good thing to do. What happens is that although the politicians are taking decisions to increase and propose that to PUCSL, PUCSL is governed by an act. PUCSL Act is a very powerful act. It's a very independent commission. Whoever becomes the chairman of the commission will do the right thing according to the methodology, and they will do the right thing. Now, if you look at this Reform Act, what they have proposed now, the power vested in Public Utilities Commission has been withdrawn. Now, if you look at the tariff, it was decided finally at the recommendation of the PUCSL. Now, with the Reform Act, the methodology is decided by the minister, and the tariff will be decided by the minister, like what we see in the petrol and diesel prices. He just tweets once a month and decide the price.
But I thought fuel prices were cost reflective now. There was a
I will
formula.
probably
Is there a formula? I think the last time that we physically saw a formula with our own eyes was when former Minister Mangala Samaravira, late Minister Mangala Samaravira, raised that board at the press briefing, and then the same ministers who are now advocating for cost reflective pricing and a fuel pricing formula were vehemently against it at the time.
No.
So is there a formula now for fuel pricing?
It is not a cost reflective formula.
It's not.
It's the way that they probably spend money to import fuel, taxes, duties, other expenses, and the profit. There's no formula. And the way that they spend money in importing, distribution and all those things is given in this thing, and they call it a formula. And when you look at the prices that they import, we will talk about in a different forum about this subject. It might probably deviate from our co-subject over here. I have been talking about the tariff decision will be in the future taken by the subject minister. And there will be a electricity appeals tribunal. They will be the final decision maker in tariff formula, where the tribunal members is appointed by the minister, unlike in the commission. And you look at licensing powers is vested with the commission now. It will be withdrawn in the future and given to the tribunal. And the tribunal, why I am talking about this appeals tribunal, the members of the tribunal is appointed by the politicians, unlike the members of the PUCSL, where they are subject to qualifications, exposure, experience, and finally by the Constitutional Council. These members are just appointed by the minister. And not only that, I just said that this big entity they are proposing to break into 15 pieces. Now the danger is that the earlier in this draft, they had first draft, they said that there will be a company for Mahaweli, company for Randenigala, there's another company for Samanawala. Now what they say is one company to cover the hydropower. And these companies are established under the Companies Act of 2007. And again, not only that, the coal power plant, which produces 1/3 of the power generation in this country, will be given to another private company. And the recently established wind plant in Mana will be given to another company. Not only that, the transmission grid, then the system operation, then the distribution. Distribution, of course, we have no problem because there's one company, LECO, and there will be another 3 more companies. We have no problem, giving distributions to different entities. And
but now on that point alone, the distribution, the reason why they want to diversify at least the distribution is to create some sort of competition, because at the moment it's a case of the minister coming out and saying, look here, this is the price, not the minister, I mean whichever entity, the CEB, the PUCSL together with the CEB coming out and saying, look here, this is the price of electricity, you either pay it or stay in the dark.
Yes.
But if there is some sort of competition, I mean, market environments.
Yes. The private entities, although there are 4 or 5 distribution companies, they will not compete with each other. Probably, by having different areas demarcated for these companies, there will be naturally better thing, because customer might in certain areas will get a better service. But they will not probably compete with each other with pricing. The pricing is decided by the tribunal, which is headed by the minister. Now, why I say is that this biggest entity is broken into 15 pieces. And if they say this is the reforms and the restructuring, I think these politicians are not aware of what is restructuring and reviving of business, or maybe rehabilitation of business. And they think that when you break these big entities like CPC and CEB, now see what has happened to CPC. CPC, they think the reforms and the restructuring is giving 150 petrol distribution stations to maybe another company, another distributor. Is it real reforms? What does it bring to the country or to benefit the people? Initially, the distribution companies may invest around $200 million, and they will import their first lot of the fuel, and the next one, when they sell in their stations, they will collect rupees and they will go to our banks and ask for dollars. And we will have the same problem. Now, reforms and the restructuring and the rehabilitation is not just breaking these big entities and giving it to private parties unless you really manage them properly. Now, in these entities, what has gone wrong is that these entities are not managed properly. Now, I say that, in last year, August, CB income per month was 20 billion. Now, it is 50 billion.
Okay.
Now, even though they earn around 50 billion a month, they can't manage their cash flows. And if you look at their monthly cash flows, they go to these 2 big banks, especially BOC and People's Bank. They borrow billions of money. And if you look at their temporary borrowings, that overdraft interest is more than 30%, where the private parties, private entrepreneurs like us pay only half of it. This is why I say that, when the cash flow is not managed properly, although you privatize it, you will not get the desired objectives or results. So therefore, if the ignorant politicians are thinking that this is reforms are only breaking these entities into small pieces and giving to private parties, and if you look at the privatization for last 2 to 3 decades, which entity has given better results to the public or to the coffers of the Sri Lankan government? So they don't look at anything They think, big entities should be broken into small pieces. Now see.
So are you saying that the CEB and maybe state-owned enterprises have contributed more to Sri Lanka's coffers than private entities paying taxes?
Now you are talking about taxes. If you look at how much the CPC has paid to the coffers of the government for last 6 months, is more than 200 billion.
In taxes?
In taxes. Apart from making 70 billion from the public. Now I mentioned in an interview, I think yesterday or day before also, now from the fuel selling and imports, government has made more than 200 billion in taxes, and the CPC has made 70 billion in profits. Now who's paying this huge amount of taxes and profits? This is the common public is paying. The people who are not having even enough to eat. They have to now say electricity tariff was increased by 300%. Water tariff was increased by 290%. And gas prices, they were about to increase the gas prices, but for some reason they withdrew. And now end of the day, who's paying these taxes and the profits to the government? Now say you take these two large banks, BOC and People's Bank. If you look at their bottom line for last year, the country is in a dire situation, businesses are not doing good, and people are in trouble. If you look at their NPLs, non-performing loans, running up to 12 to 15%. But still you look at the bottom line of these banks, hefty, 30, 40 billion. Whose money is this? Now this money is from the common public, and whether it is private sector or the government sector, who pays end of the day? The consumer, innocent consumer. You look at, not only these, big things, like water and essential things like electricity. You look at the price of egg, price of chicken. Who decides? And there's no proper mechanism. Now I say certain entities are mismanaged. But I feel now in Sri Lanka, these entities, especially government entities, not mismanaged, and there's no management. They're just floating. And you need to fix it first. You fix the internal problem first and try to make sure that you are running it effectively, then at least you can get a better price from the private sector. When the loss-making entities are given to private sector, will they pay a right price? And this ignorant politician cannot even understand that. We are trying to sell a loss-making entity to private sector. Can you get a better price? No. And they are lacking of entrepreneurship, they are lacking of business acumen, they are lacking of economic sense, they don't know even the numbers.
So Mr. Janaka Ratnayake, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that divesting these state-owned enterprises at a time like this,
yes,
when they are loss-making institutions, marred with corruption, mismanagement, call it what you will,
yes,
is actually a bad thing, and instead what the government should do is fix these problems first and then try to divest,
get the best
sell
price
off, and try and get the best price, like you said.
Yeah.
But of course, Mr. Ratnayake, we need to keep in mind that the government had several decades to
yes,
fix these problems. The government had several decades
yes,
to also ensure energy security in Sri Lanka, and willingly or unwillingly, knowingly or unknowingly, they didn't do it. For reasons that I know not. We'll cross over to a short commercial break and bring you more on the energy sector of Sri Lanka. Where are we headed as a country? Stay tuned. You're watching Newsline live.
News First, Newsline.
Challenging the domestic debt optimization plan approved in Parliament in court is a breach of parliamentary privileges, a decision by the Speaker. Supreme Court dismisses petition brought against inclusion of ETF and EPF in the domestic debt optimization process. 3 more proposals to amend the Provincial Council's Elections Act. Advisory committees to be appointed to support governors. Conduct a referendum prior to amending laws, says the leader of the opposition. Uttara Lanka Sabhagaya seeks representation in party leaders' meetings while questioning quorum in Parliament. 51% of the population believe that governance and corruption must be fixed to rebuild Sri Lanka. New research report reveals.
News First, Newsline.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsline Live. We're in discussion with the former chairman of the PUCSL, Mr. Janaka Ratnayake. Mr. Ratnayake, now you said that Sri Lanka's energy security is, of course, compromised.
Yes.
And one of the main reasons that you said this is because since 2012, since the construction of the Norachole power plant, there has been no construction of new power plants. And of course, the demand for electricity, like in any country, like in any developing country, continues to grow in Sri Lanka. Although at the moment, with the increasing prices, there is a slight, or maybe even a little bit more than a slight drop in the demand for electricity. But that doesn't give the government or the responsible officials in the electricity sector the leeway to continue to ignore this entire angle or aspect of power generation and not construct any power plants in the country for maybe another decade or so. So we are now at a point where we're looking at renewable energy. I think the government has set a very ambitious target of 70 to 80% renewable energy by the year 2030. So where do you think Sri Lanka is on this path? Do you think renewable energy really could get us there? And if so, what are the plans for the construction of power plants as of now?
Now, I think it's a good subject to talk about it. Way back in 2017, PUCSL proposed the energy composition should be 60-40. 60% renewable, 40% others. And at that time, CB did not like it, and they went even into a no cooperation pact with PUCSL. That's the way that, CB was looking at renewable energy sector in Sri Lanka. And fortunately, with the new government came into power in 2019, the mandate was 80-20, which was not practical, but finally they compromised at 70-30. But as you rightly said, since 2012, no major power plants were established after the third unit of Norachole. And only one is that 100 megawatts wind power plant at Mana, where they are trying to privatize it now. Now, renewable energy, if you look at the look at our geographical location, we are in a right position to go for maybe even 70. That now target is in 2030 that it is 70-30. But where are the plans? Now, we are talking about renewable energy, whereas there is a problem in southern grid that they cannot connect this the transmission line for 8 years due to a small technical issue, which was not brought to even the notice of PUCSL to take appropriate decision. But during these 8 years, they spent billions of money to buy energy from the private sectors without spending that emergency power purchase, without spending that few million rupees, and to sort out this issue. Now, this is what I am talking always about, these reforms and restructuring and rehabilitation of these entities. Proper management is not there. When the proper management is not there, you can't even fix a small thing. When I say that, you cannot even fix a small thing like price of an egg, kilo of a chicken, or maybe, a small transmission, small issue in a transmission line. How can they talk about big picture? These politicians are, as I told you, they are ignorant of economic and financial, the game. They do not know this. And when they do not know this, they have to get the experts and fix this problem. Instead, what they are trying to do is, they are even, sidelining even the policymakers and the experts, and the politician is trying to, do everything by himself and taking the power into his hands. And even removing, entities of PUCSL and other commissions. So this is where the problem is. I think people should be, especially politicians, should be disciplined enough to understand their restrictions and the limitations, and get the right experts, right people, right entities, and fix these issues. And these entities, like the Water Supply and Drainage Board, CEB, CPC, and these are, entities that giving, so much of the services to the common public. And if you look at the electricity supply in Sri Lanka, almost 99.9%, and everybody is using. But if you look at the disconnection due to this huge price hike since last August, is beyond even any measures, that, you know, people are now not using electricity in some sectors, and especially people who are vulnerable and they are unable to probably, you know, find their day-to-day living, they are going away from electricity. The electricity is like a, you know, monster. And some certain things, certain people complain that, you know, when they see their electricity bill, and they cannot do anything else because we have to pay only the electricity bill. So it has come to a point where people are unable to afford the electricity and the water bills in time to come, because these are necessary things. You know, they give only maybe 1 or 2 months grace period to pay. Unless you pay, it will be, you know, disconnected. And people are, you know, when these essential things are not there, and how can they, you know, continue their normal day-to-day life? So this is a serious issue. The energy security, food security, and the national security. Now say, with the reforms and, you know, giving these plans, big plans to private sectors, not only it will challenge the energy security, it will challenge the national security. So, because the parties, the private sectors can decide. Now say, if you have an issue like what we are facing now in this, you know, water distribution in southern area. Now at least the cabinet can intervene and take a decision to disburse the water to the farmers. Now if this lies, the entire authorities lies with the private sector, what will they do? They will try to maximize their profits. They will not look at, you know, farmers' lives or their cultivation. And they will say that, you know, now, and again you see this, the power generation from hydro is cost, if you look at the cost, is only 3 rupees. And no sooner it goes to a private hand, they will try to compare the cost of the other things and say that, you know, I need the same tariff like, you know, on par with the other things. All the water is given by the nature. Or it's a, you know, it's a national resources, belongs to everybody. End of the day, what happens is, when it is given to private sector, they own it. So they will take a decision. Whether that decision will not compromise our energy security, national security, and our food security. If you are, by going to fix one issue, you are inviting, you know, many issues. This is why the politicians should be mindful. They cannot take ignorant decisions. But our politicians for the last 75 years have become ignorant. People do follow them, and they give the mandate to these people. They come and destroy, and finally we go and complain to each other. We are getting them, and we are getting messed up, and we complain to, you know, the same parties. This has to be stopped at one point.
I think a very valid point, and a very, very valid point to end our discussion here, of course, not for the lack of things to discuss on the program, but due to the want of time. Thank you very much, Mr. Janaka Ratnayake, former chairman of the PUCSL, for joining us and highlighting these issues. And then, quite likely, as you said, Mr. Ratnayake, it is we ourselves who appoint our leaders. There is a democratic process here in Sri Lanka, or at least there is a constitution and a democratic process that should be followed, although that too is in a little bit of a question right now, as elections are still delayed and we don't know when the next election is being held. But come the next election, think twice before you vote, because the people who you vote for will decide on whether or not Sri Lanka will succeed in the future. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and God bless.